Right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Renu Paul, and I am one among the executive members of MASO and currently working as a social worker at South Riverdale Community Health Center. And I'll be your moderator for this session. Thank you all for joining us today. Before we begin, please note that this session is being recorded and may be shared on our social media platforms. It would be great if you could turn all your cameras on and mics off. We will begin with our land acknowledgement. This will be delivered by Neeraja, a valuable member of our MASO Executive Committee. Neeraja, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Um, as we gather today from across Ontario to celebrate Indigenous Month, we begin by acknowledging that the land we are on is the traditional territory of many nations. These include the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat, the Mississaugas of the Credit, and other diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples who have lived on and cared for this land since time immemorial. We honor the enduring presence, wisdom, and contributions of Indigenous peoples, and we recognize that Ontario is covered by many treaties, including Treaty 13 and the Williams Treaties. As settlers, including those of us who are part of the Malayali diaspora, we reflect on our responsibilities to learn from and stand in solidarity with Indigenous communities in their ongoing efforts for truth, justice, and reconciliation. Let this acknowledgement be more than words. Let it inspire action, humility, and a deep respect for the Indigenous peoples whose land we now live and work on. Make which, thank you.
Thank you, Neeraja. I would like to welcome everyone once again to this workshop. For those who may be new to MASO, it stands for Malayali Association of Social Workers in Ontario. MASO is a registered nonprofit organization representing approximately 700 immigrant social workers across Ontario with a Malayali descent. MASO is committed to promoting the professional and social advancement of all social workers in the community, providing ongoing support and services. Today's workshop is brought to you by MASO in collaboration with the Ontario College of Social Workers and Social Service Workers. We are very proud to host this informative session, which will be followed by a Q&A. We do have participants joining us today with the broader social work community who are not the members of MASO as well. We are very happy to have you with us and warmly welcome you to this session. We are very pleased to welcome our guest speaker, Christina Van Sickle. Christina is a director of professional practice at the Ontario College of Social Workers and Social Service Workers. In this role, Christina develops resources to support over 30,000 social workers and social service workers in Ontario in maintaining competent and ethical practices. Christina oversees the Continuing Competence Program, conducts outreach, and frequently offers presentations. Christina also collaborates with community members, promotes the value of college registration, and is committed to strengthening the college's public protection mandate. With an extensive background in geriatrics, mental health, and substance use services, Christina has also worked as a private practitioner, developed and taught several courses, and currently serves on the board of Evangel Hall Mission, an organization working to address financial and housing instability in Toronto. Christina, we warmly welcome you. And before we begin, move on to the presentation, I would like to request everyone to kindly hold your questions until the end, where we will have a dedicated Q&A session where you can share them. Christina, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that very warm welcome. And it's just really lovely to be here with you all today this morning. Thank you very much for the invitation. We're very happy to receive it, and I'm happy to be here today. I'm going to share my screen now. And I think I'm going to share my screen. And I just have to disable this. Yes, that's what I want. Oh, hang on for a second. What's happening here? It's always the way, isn't it? That you go to share your screen and then you're not entirely sure what's happening. The site will be able to see, yes, window, that's what I want. I want the window. Oh goodness, everyone, it is freezing on me. Okay, we're gonna try that one more time. Aha.
The worst case, you can send me the presentation. I can. Oh,
Thank
great.
you. We got it. It just didn't want to cooperate for a second there. That's all. And I want to go into screen mode. Hooray. Fantastic. Isn't it lovely when technology works? Oh my goodness. The feeling of your heart stopping for a second. Anyways, thank you all again very much for being here. I really appreciate the opportunity to come and speak to you. I'm going to just start our conversation today very broadly, just to sort of set a level just about who the college is, what we do, you know, our mandate. I was asked as well to speak about some registration and renewal processes. I'm going to talk about the continuing competence program and some complex practice issues. And we also have some practice resources that I wanted to share with registrants, which are available on our website. They're free for anybody to have a look at. So those are some things. And as was mentioned as well, there will be a Q&A part. We might also get into it a little bit when we talk about complex practice issues, because I was asked to speak to the topic and I'm happy to do so, but I didn't know if there's anything specific that people wanted me to address. So that might be also an opportunity for people to put anything into the chat that they might like me to cover at that point in time. So the mandate of the college, how registration happens. And I have to say as well that being called the college is a little bit of a misnomer because we're not an educational institution, but it's one of those things that regulatory bodies in Ontario and across Canada are called colleges, the College of Social Workers, but it means that we're the regulatory body. And how a regulatory body happens is that people realize that if you're providing services to clients as a social worker or social service worker, and you're doing that in a way that is unprofessional or unethical, there's a real risk of harm to clients, because clients don't seek out social work services for no reason. They seek it out during times of change, times of strife, when they're experiencing trauma, other periods of oftentimes challenging situations in their lives. And if they're coming to seek help at that point in time, there's a power differential between the service provider and the service recipient. And so if we're providing that service in a way that, as I said, is unethical or unprofessional or incompetent, we could really harm someone. And so from the profession that there was support for regulation. And so the government tells the profession that, yes, you can regulate, you can self-regulate. And what that means is that we have a piece of legislation, which is very creatively named the Social Work and Social Service Work Act. It really says what it is right on the label. And we are accountable to the Ministry of Children, Community and Social Services. And so from that act, we were developed in 2000, and we have a council that oversees our regulatory processes. And that council is made up of 7 elected social workers, 7 elected social service workers, and 7 publicly appointed members to represent the voices of the public. We then have a registrar and CEO, and the council provides instruction and guidance to the registrar and CEO. And then myself, I am one of the, I think, 44 staff at the college, and that we are then who carry out the work of the college. And our mandate is public protection. And, you know, similar to being an association today, presenting to an association today, that at times people confuse the mandate of the college with either the Ontario Association of Social Workers or the Canadian Association of Social Workers. And associations' work is to advocate for the furtherment and betterment of the profession, which again, I think is a fantastic role and something that's really necessary. And we have really close working relationships with the Ontario and Canadian Association of Social Workers. But the college exists to protect the public. We're here, frankly, to give clients a voice, that we want to ensure that we're protecting clients from people who aren't qualified or don't have the requisite competence or who are unfit to practice. And so what that means is that only individuals who are registrants of the college, you'll hear me say registrant a lot throughout this presentation, it means somebody who's registered with the college. And only people who are registered with the college can either call themselves a social worker or social service worker or registered social worker, or use the designation RSW, because we want to ensure that if you're using that title in public, that the public will know that you're receiving services from somebody who is qualified and registered and be able to provide those services to you in a competent way. So if you want to call yourself a social worker in Ontario, you need to belong to the college. And then what we also talk about is holding out. And holding out is a little bit more challenging concept, but essentially if you're practicing in a way that the public could reasonably assume that you're a social worker, then that could also be something that we could say, you know what, you're practicing in a way that either come and join with us, or you've got to practice in a different way that you're not going to be leading clients on to assume that they're receiving services from a social worker. The other piece that the college also has is our public register, where you're able to go on to the college's website and you're able to look up any social. You can go look up me right now, again, Christina Van Sickle, and you can see that I'm a member of the college in good standing. You can see my level of education, where I work, and how long I've been a college registrant for. And again, we encourage all clients to do this, not just if you're working with a social worker, but you can do this for your nurses, your doctors, your OTs, psychotherapists, really any health provider. You can go on their public website and look them up on their register to see if there's any notations against their practice, or if they're a member in good standing of their college. So it's just one of the ways that we try to promote that to the public so that they are thoughtful in thinking about, maybe I should check who the service provider is that I'm receiving services from. So the college, we set the registration requirements. So only individuals who have graduated from accredited schools of social work or social service work, or have had their international credentials been verified through the Canadian Association of Social Workers, that those individuals are permitted to register with us. And so you have to have those special academic qualifications. We also have the standards of practice. And so those of us who are registrants of the college will be familiar with the standards of practice. And what's interesting about the Code of Ethics and Standards of Practice is that they don't set out best practices, they set out the minimum requirements for practice. And what that means is a couple things. One, the practice of social work and social service work is so broad. And it's really one of the super cool things about our professions is that you can work anywhere from community development to immigration services, to kidney dialysis, to palliative care, to child welfare, and everything in between. And that scope of practice being so broad, it would be impossible to develop best practices for all of those areas. And so what we have done is we've created minimum requirements for practice. So the minimum standards that all registrants must be practicing against. And that is the standard of upon that registrants are required to uphold. And the standards of practice, they talk about the scopes of practice for social work and social service work. They talk about, there's a glossary that talks about definitions of client and supervision and a variety of things. And then there's 8 principles that the standards of practice are broken into, which talk about our relationship with clients, the fact that we need to be competent and have integrity in our practice, our responsibilities to clients. They talk about our documentation practices, confidentiality, fees and advertising, which is really important if you're doing any type of private practice work, and of course, sexual misconduct, because we know that, again, the position of power that social workers have with their clients, there's a real risk if a social worker was to enter into a sexual relationship with a client afterwards, which unfortunately, if you've gone on our website, you've seen that that does happen if you look through some of the discipline cases that are there. And so if you've provided any type of counseling or psychotherapy services to a client, you can never enter into a romantic relationship with them after that. So that's what our standards of practice talk about. They're level setting for the minimum requirements of practice in Ontario. The college also supports ongoing learning. We're going to talk about this a bit more with the continuing competence program. And so what that means is that every year, all registrants must participate in the continuing competence program, or the CCP for short. And essentially, this is required that registrants reflect upon each year what their learning goals are, to reflect upon their practice, if there's areas where they want to develop their skills, if there's knowledge that they recognize that they want to attain, and they then develop learning goals and learning activities to meet those learning goals, which can be very wide-ranging. And each year, registrants need to work on maintaining and continuing their competence to practice. And, I sometimes talk about this, using the analogy of that when, you are in school, you're getting all of the most up-to-date, current, evidence-based, relevant information and research. And then as we leave school, we're not getting that same sort of pipeline, if you will, of information. And so we really have to dedicate ourselves to ensuring that we stay current and stay up to date with different practice modalities and current practices and new and emerging practice areas and client issues, so that we can really maintain that competence as we practice throughout our careers. And the last part of what the college does as well is that we provide oversight and discipline processes as well. Now, at times when I talk to people about the complaints and discipline process, is what we call it, two things happen. One, sometimes people think this is all the college does. And sometimes, it can be understandably kind of an anxiety-producing area for people. Now, it is an area, it is something the college does, of course. It's an important role of the college. Excuse me, but I'm quite hopeful that throughout this presentation, you're going to see that it's only part of what the college does. But the college receives probably, I think, between 300 and 400 complaints a year. And, we've got 34,000 registrants. So, that's not a huge amount for the amount of registrants that we have. But the vast majority of our complaints, over 60% of them, go to no further action. And part of that is because they may have been frivolous or vexatious, or the client may have been unhappy with services, but that doesn't mean that anything unethical or unprofessional occurred. And that can be just part of working in a profession where you are working with clients who are going through some really challenging things. And maybe it's the mandate of our practice or our organization that we're not able to help them in the way that they would like to be helped. Or perhaps, for a variety of reasons, they were unhappy with the outcome of services. But that doesn't mean that anything unethical or unprofessional occurred. So 60% of the complaints that we receive go to no further action. Of those remaining 40%, 30 of them go through our confidential complaints process, which is remedial. And the intent of the complaints process is to help registrants understand if there was an area in their practice where they maybe need some additional training or supervision, or perhaps they need some therapy themselves in order to continue practicing in that professional and ethical way. And it's completely confidential, the complaints process, that it doesn't get posted on our website. There's no notations that get made on the public register. It's something that stays in a confidential process. Even me in my position at professional practice, I'm not privy to what happens in the complaints processes because it's confidential. I'm not required to know that information. It's the remaining 10% of cases, which really sometimes only equates to about 3 cases per year, that go through our discipline process. And if you are a college registrant, you will be aware that on the college website that there is a section where you can go to see the upcoming discipline cases that are there and the discipline hearings that are happening. And these are where people will have sexually abused a client, or they have defrauded clients, or had egregious confidentiality breaches of like hundreds of files. So it's quite serious conduct. And again, that equates to over between the 300 and 400 complaints the college receives a year, maybe 3 or 4 cases. So I think it's just important to provide that oversight and that overview, because yes, the college does have a complaints and discipline piece to it, because we want to protect clients and the public from incompetent and unfit and unprofessional practice. But as a college registrant, understand that the amount of cases that go through to that public discipline piece, which is published on the website, in our newsletter, on the register, it's quite rare for that to happen. So I hope that that makes sense and provides some important context around the complaints and discipline piece. So again, just reviewing the college is here to protect the public. It's what we do. That is what we breathe. That is the clients that we want to provide a voice to. That's why we're here. We want to give clients a voice. And we do this by setting the registration requirements for who is able to join the college. We have and maintain the code of ethics and standards of practice. As I said, that we support registrants through them completing the CCP or continuing competence program each year. And we have an oversight and discipline process. So that's just a level set to understand who the college is, what we do, why we're here. And it's, just to kind of give that snapshot to sort of level set for our conversation today. And I was asked as well to talk about the registration and renewals process. And so I will move forward with that. So in order to register with the college, that you either have to have a degree in social work from an accredited Canadian program or an approved international program. Excuse me. And as I mentioned earlier, it's the Canadian Association of Social Workers who will assess whether or not an international degree is accredited or approved to be equivalent to a Canadian degree as well. And individuals who are practicing in Canada have to be legal, who are registering, need to be legally approved to be able to work in Ontario, and that they need to be able to pass a certain English proficiency test as well that we have online, and information can be found on the website for that. There's also an application form that needs to be filled out. There is a $100 one-time fee for the application form as well. And then it takes about 4 to 6 weeks to process somebody's registration. As of October 1st, we do have a new registration requirement, and that we are requiring all new applicants to submit a vulnerable sector check. And this is something that people can obtain through their local police office, that if you go down to your local headquarters for police, that you're able to submit a request to get a vulnerable sector check. This is a really common activity for individuals who are volunteering. Oftentimes, if you are working at a health center or a hospital or with children or other vulnerable individuals, you are required to have a vulnerable sector check as well. You have to go to the police headquarters in your area. Some police headquarters as well require, it's an employment code or an employment number in order to do that. The college does have a code that can be given as well. You can find it on our website if the police headquarters require that to do the vulnerable sector check. And we've noticed that the prices for these vary between about $35 to $75, depending on where you live, to get a vulnerable sector check. And again, the time required to get them can vary as well. At times it can be a week, and at times it can be 2 months. And so it's something that we do recommend if people are considering to apply, to do that early in the process as well. And it's really important to note as well that if somebody does have any findings on their vulnerable sector check, that does not automatically disqualify you from being able to register with the college. That if there is a finding, the registrar and CEO will review it on a case-by-case basis to determine whether or not that finding has any relevance to practice. So for example, we've received information from registrants that they got arrested, or from applicants that they got arrested for possession of cannabis prior to cannabis being legal in Ontario. And so that would no longer be something that, would disqualify someone. Another common one is for someone who's had a DUI or driving while intoxicated. If it wasn't relevant to your practice, then that might not disqualify somebody from registering. If you had a DUI while driving a client, that would maybe be a different story. But this is something that would occur in your private life that has no relevance to your practice, then that would not be something that would automatically disqualify somebody from registering with the college. So there is that individual context that would be applied, and any applicant would be afforded the opportunity to provide additional information as well for that finding to be evaluated by the registrar. Also worth noting is that we will, we believe 2027, we're not sure when in 2027, but there will be an upcoming entry to practice exam that the college is going to implement. Now, we are working with organization called the Association of Social Work Boards. They develop all of the social work exams for every state in the United States and a variety of provinces already in Ontario. Pardon me, a variety of provinces in Canada. And so they are the association that develops social work entry to practice exams. There is a new exam that is being developed currently. And the interesting piece about Ontario implementing an exam is that we weren't able to implement an exam until that exam was going to be able to be offered in French, because of course we offer all of our services in English and French, and that we also needed to have an exam for social service workers as well, which isn't a profession that is regulated really anywhere else. There's a few people, or a few provinces rather, in the Maritimes which are beginning to. And so these exams are being developed currently. There will be much, much more information coming about this when we have the information about where the exams are at and where they're going to be launched. And that there certainly will be information on our website, information on the ASWB website about where people can get more information about how to prepare for the exam, have practice exams. There'll be booklets about how to prepare and practice questions that people can look at prior to implementation. And as I said, our best guess right now is that we'll be probably in the latter half of 2027, but we're quite hopeful that in the first, we're coming up close right now, it's almost 2026 right now, but in the first few months of 2026, we'll have some much clearer indication from ASWB about when that exam is going to be launched. So if you are someone who is thinking of registering with the college, it may be, if you wanted to avoid doing the entry to practice exam, it might be something to consider doing in the next year or so, if you didn't want to take an entry to practice exam. Just putting that out there, food for thought. So I know that some people on the call today are already registered with the college as well, myself included. I'm also a member. And so it is renewal season for myself and all of my other social work colleagues right now. And all registrants need to renew their membership by December 31st each year. If you do miss it by a couple of days, we do have a grace period. People aren't charged late fees until February 1st. So there is a grace period, but we do ask that all registrants renew by December 31st each year. And in order to renew, you need to log in to the registrant portal, which again can be found on the college website. And you're asked if you need to update any of your personal or business information. And that's something that you can do right through the portal. We have a video on the applicant, or pardon me, the registrant's page, which shows how to update your portal and how to fill out the information that you need to and what information needs to be included there. And we also request that individuals confirm their conduct declaration. So individuals will be asked whether or not that they have been charged with any crimes this year, or if they have had any findings of professional misconduct brought against them this year. Again, if you have, you will be permitted to provide additional information to explain what that situation is. And that doesn't automatically mean that your registration will be revoked. It means that it will be looked at and it will be reviewed, and it will be determined whether or not, if there was any conduct that occurred in the past year that would impact your ability to practice safely. And if it doesn't, then it's not an issue. You also have to confirm your participation in the continuing competence program. And again, we're going to talk about that a little bit more in a second, but what that means is that you're going to be taken to a page, and there's about 4 tick boxes that said, yes, I read the standards of practice and the required resources. Yes, I did my self-assessment tool, my performance development tool, and you tick that off. And you don't actually have to submit your continuing competence program to the college. That's something that you hold for your own records for 10 years after the fact. You're also going to be invited to share demographic information voluntarily. The college is in a unique position that we have, like I said, 34,000 registrants. So we are the sort of central repository where we can really find out about who is providing services in Ontario, and do the composition of social workers reflect the composition of Ontarians. And so that's information that we've been collecting, because we can also distribute, and it's completely anonymized information that is aggregated. No individual identifiers are associated to it. The college can't see it in your file either, what any of your answers are. It's all reviewed by an external agency called Diversio, because we're really trying to determine whether or not the social workers we have in Ontario are meeting the needs of Ontarians based on, what communities you belong to, and whether or not individuals are receiving services and can receive services from an individual from their similar community if they so chose to do so. So that's information that we've been collecting for the last couple of years. And again, it's voluntary. You don't have to provide that information or not, but it is information that if you don't collect the data, you don't know. And so that's what we're trying to do. That's something that's voluntary and that you'll be requested to do on your renewal. And then, of course, you've got to pay the annual fee, and it's stayed stable at $400 for the past several years. And really, when you look at the costs for other regulatory bodies as well, it's really very reasonable. That I know that some other regulatory bodies, that their annual fee is much, much higher as well. And I was also going to reflect now on the continuing competence program. As we've mentioned, this is something that all registrants of the college who are renewing right now, and full disclosure, I haven't renewed yet. So I need to do this myself. I'm in the same boat as everybody else. That you do need to complete your continuing competence program before you renew each year as well. And I wonder, oh, okay. So hopefully my video is going to play for us right now. Let's cross our fingers that the technology, is on our side. Can you hear the music?
As social workers and social service workers, we must remain current in our knowledge and continually enhance our practice. That's why, as members of our professions, we are required to complete the CCP. There are many different ways the CCP can help you in your practice. The CCP is a user-friendly tool to help you manage your ongoing learning throughout the year. You can complete a variety of learning activities to ensure you remain confident in your practice and achieve your goals, and all in just 4 easy steps. So, let's get started. Step 1. Review the Code of Ethics and Standards of Practice Handbook. Complete the checklist and reflect on the standards of practice. Step 2. Complete the self-assessment tool by identifying your strengths and learning needs. As a next step, ask a peer, colleague, supervisor, and/or client. Their feedback can help you develop the learning goals that you'll work towards throughout the year. Step 3. The Professional Development Plan. Here, you simply transfer your goals from the self-assessment tool and determine what steps or activities you will complete to meet your learning goals. Be sure to indicate how your goals apply to your practice. Step 4. Complete the Declaration of Participation in the CCP as part of the annual renewal of registration process. And be sure to keep all the documents pertaining to your CCP. But what if you're not practicing? Whether you're a new graduate or off on leave, you are still required to participate in the CCP. You may draw upon lived experiences that support your readiness to practice. After all, it's important for you to continually enhance your confidence for when you return to practice. Participation in the CCP is required on an annual basis and should be completed throughout the year. Get started on your CCP today. Learn more at OCSWSSW.org or email us directly at ccp@OCSWSSW.org.
Makes me so happy when technology works. So as we heard, and it's interesting too, because that video is a little old, you would have said, you maybe would have seen that it said, hold your portfolio for 7 years. It's now 10 years because we've updated the standards of practice since that video was developed. And so what registrants are required to do is each year is read through the standards of practice. And then also we have required resources that are needed to be viewed as well that the college puts out there. And if you go onto our website, underneath registrants, there is a tab that says CCP. And if you click there, you'll be able to see that the required resources are listed. There is a video this year and a couple articles as well for individuals to have a look at. Then you need to do the self-assessment tool. So as it showed in the video as well, that you determine where your strengths are, where your opportunities for growth are, maybe where you don't have knowledge, or where you maybe want to shift to a different client group that you've been working with, or even a different practice setting. So this is something that's new to you and you don't have that knowledge, you don't have that competence. So determining what are some of the learning goals that you have, which could be simply that I'd really like to understand more about consent and confidentiality when I'm working with children and youth. Because that is a bit of a tricky area of practice. And so, okay, great, that's one of my goals. So what are my learning activities going to be? I'm going to, excuse me, look at information that's on the college's website. I'm going to look at the Information and Privacy Commissioner website, because there's information there about working with children. I can talk to colleagues. I can review any workplace policies that we have in place. Well, those would be your learning activities. And so that's what you're going to do on your self-assessment tool. And with the professional development plan, it's really figuring out those learning activities, which I just indicated, that how you're going to fulfill those learning goals. And then what's your evidence going to be? Oh, well, I read this article, I read this policy, I spoke to this individual, I reviewed this website. And it's important to note as well that when you complete what we call the annual declaration of participation in the CCP, it's something that is on the renewal page. So it's not a separate document that you have to complete. It's part of your renewal process. So when you go in to renew your registration, and as you said, or as we earlier looked at, that you make sure that all of your professional and personal information is updated. You talk about your conduct, you tick off boxes. This will be one of the boxes that you tick off, that did you participate in the CCP this year? And this is where you indicate that you did. And you don't at current need to send any information into the college. It's just the attestation that you complete on your renewal form, but you do need to keep your evidence of completion in your own personal records for 10 years. And one of the things that we really like to highlight as well is that the CCP isn't meant to be a barrier to practice. It's not meant to be onerous. It's meant to be accessible and meaningful. And so it's really up to you, because it's based on an adult education model, to determine what are your learning needs and what are those learning activities you're going to complete in order to fulfill your learning needs. Again, harkening back on one of the great aspects of our profession is that our scope of practice is so broad. It can be challenging to say, for the college, to say you must take this course, you must take this course, you must do this, because maybe, we would prescribe a course that wouldn't apply to where you work. And so that's why, this adult education learning module is so important, that you need to determine where your learning goals meet, and that you could meet those learning goals, of course, by attending courses or workshops or completing a certificate program. Those are very traditional ways of completing our learning goals, and they're excellent. But they're not always accessible to people. Sometimes it's because of finances, sometimes it's because of geography. Maybe people don't have access to taking those courses or certificates. And so it can also be watching a lecture, going onto the college website and reading articles there. If you supervise a student, that can count as your CCP. If you've done any volunteer work that applies to your work as a professional. And of course, even earlier this week, we had our educational forum. We have one each year, always in the fall, typically in November. And then we have our annual meeting and education day as well in June. And we have a variety of different speakers for that are all live streamed and then saved on our website. And all of that information is on our website now. So people could easily go to our website, view different courses, read different articles, and that would certainly satisfy your CCP requirements for the year. Another interesting point that we talk to people about, and it was mentioned briefly in the video, is that sometimes, for a variety of different reasons, people's personal circumstances don't allow them to participate in some of the learning activities we've just discussed. And we have had conversations with individuals who perhaps they've gone through a medical event themselves, or perhaps they've needed to step away from practice because they're a caregiver. Certainly, experiences and learning that you glean from those experiences may apply to your practice. That how is it being a client or a patient or a service recipient, how might that inform your practice moving forward if you can reflect on that? How is being a caregiver, how would that inform your practice? Understanding and having a greater empathy about what someone who is providing care goes through. So even lived experiences can be utilized towards someone's CCP if it's appropriate towards their own learning goals. So again, this is something that we want to be very flexible. We do hear from people at times that I've just been too busy. I haven't had the opportunity to do this. And it's like, well, haven't you? I'm sure you've read something. I'm sure you've participated in something. As I mentioned, it's not a program that has been designed to be onerous, but it is a program that's designed for you to be self-reflective on your practice and to really determine where you may need to grow your skills or your information or your knowledge, and to make a plan as to how to do that. I did want to just take a pause just to give my own breath a second as well, and to let people consider the complex practice issues. So this is a very broad topic, and I didn't know if before I move on to this, if there was any questions about what I've spoken about already, or if there was something specific when we talk about complex practice issues that people would like me to touch on. Remembering that there will be time for questions at the end as well.
Do we have any questions here? You may also drop your questions in the chat if that's what you're comfortable with.
Absolutely. And it's okay if you don't now, but as Renu said, if you've got any questions that you want to put in the chat as well that we can address at the end, I'm more than happy to do that. Or as I'm talking about some practice issues, if something strikes for you, please go ahead and use the chat if that's what you're comfortable doing. So when considering complex practice issues, I thought about the topics that we most commonly get asked at in the professional practice department. Because just to let people know that one of my roles in professional practice is to develop resources, as you heard, and I write a lot of articles, and we develop videos and different resources for registrants. We get to do excellent presentations where we get to come and meet people, just like we're doing right now, either virtually or in person, which is a really fantastic and excellent opportunity for us. The other piece that we do is that we respond to consultations from registrants as well. The registrants will often email us, or sometimes we do have a booking form on the website as well, where people can book a private or a professional practice consultation. And people will call us when they're having, challenging practice scenarios or ethical dilemmas that they're not sure how to navigate. And so when thinking about that, I thought, okay, well, these are some of the most common issues that we get asked about. And oftentimes people will call us to ask whether or not if in a given situation, they have a duty to warn or a duty to protect. And what that means is when you're working with a client, they may indicate through your work together that they have either plans to harm themselves or plans to harm someone else. And that harm is what we would call real, severe, and imminent. So that they've been very specific about who they're going to harm, when they're going to harm them, and how they're going to do it. And it could be, after we leave this, or after I leave this session, I'm going to go home and I'm going to beat up my spouse, for an example. And that would be something that a registrant would say, okay, so is this a harm that is real, severe, and imminent? And at times, you may have the opportunity to either through your organization, or if you're in private practice and you have professional liability insurance that you would purchase through the Ontario Association of Social Workers, through your professional liability insurance, you have access to free legal consultation. And if you are able to, if the time permits, obtain a legal consultation. Now, I've had times where it's too much of a risk that you have to just call. For example, I called a client once just to check on them. I know they'd been having a hard time and I wanted to see how they were doing. And they let me know on our phone call that they're in the midst of a suicide attempt. There was absolutely no way that I was going to get legal consultation about what I needed to do to breach this client's confidentiality in that time, or to provide information about them without their consent. I called 911 and, the person received the help. If there is a situation in which you believe that there is opportunity for you to get that legal consult, either through your organization, through your professional liability insurance, consult with a manager, a supervisor, a peer, consult it all. Because when we're determining that we're going to release client information without their consent, it's a big deal. Because it's the law that we keep client personal health information confidential. And so if we are choosing to essentially break the law, we're doing it for a really good reason, and that we're doing it to protect the client, and we're doing it perhaps also to protect somebody else who has been named by the client who they may go and hurt. But it is one of these situations where we always caution registrants that if you have the opportunity, like if you're consulting with the college, you probably have the time, to consider this, that obtain a legal consultation, because it is a question of law, whether or not you have met the legal threshold to release someone's information without their consent. Because it's really a fundamental, important part of our work with clients, that they need to trust us, because they've come to us in a very vulnerable state, and that they're not going to be able to tell us their stories or be able to explain their situation to us unless they know that their information is going to be kept confidential. And so if we're choosing to release somebody's information without their consent, it's a very big decision to be made. But those are ones where we get questions about, on a fairly regular basis, that whether or not the conditions exist in order to warn someone or protect someone. And the additional piece about this that is a little bit challenging is that this isn't written in the law anywhere, duty to warn or duty to protect. It's in the common law. So it's been set by legal precedents. And so there's also no guidance on who you need to call to warn. So maybe in a situation you're going to call, like the one that I said about the spouse, maybe you're going to call the spouse directly and say, this is what they've just said, this is their plan, get to safety. Maybe you're going to call the police. Maybe you're going to call another individual who may be able to assist in this matter. So duty to warn or duty to protect, if at all possible, never try to handle those situations on your own. Try to consult with others, be it legal, be it your supervisor, your manager, your team members, again, unless the threat is so immediate that you just have to act. So that's one of the ones that we do consult about a fair amount. Similar to this is that we get calls from registrants who have had requests to release client information, and they're unclear if they are permitted to release client information. Because similar to what we were just talking about, there are laws, the Personal Health Information Protection Act specifically, that talks about when we're allowed to collect, disclose, and use client health information. Now, one of the tricky pieces that we hear about this is that if we have a youth client and one of their parents has requested to see the youth's record, and there's a lot of, I don't know if it's misinformation or misunderstanding about how we can release youth information, and even youth being able to consent to treatment as well. And some organizations will have policies in place that you have to be 12 or you need to have client or parental consent. But interestingly enough, when we look at the law about working with youth, that under the Healthcare Consent Act and the Personal Health Information Protection Act, there's no age-based milestone for youth being able to consent to treatment or consent to the release of their records. What is required is a capacity-based assessment. And so it's required of the registrant, of the social worker, to determine whether or not that youth has the capacity to determine whether or not they want to proceed with services, don't want to proceed with services, and what the benefits or deficits of each of those decisions would be. Similarly, it's up to the youth, if they're capable, to determine whether or not they want to release their information or not release their information, and what the benefits and deficits of that decision could be. On this topic, interestingly enough, the college has just revised our practice guidelines on consent and confidentiality with children and youth, which will be posted on our website on Monday or Tuesday next week. It just happened 2 days ago that we got the new practice guidelines approved. And they go into depth about how to assess for capacity in youth and how to determine whether or not we are going to release youth client information without consent. So important practice considerations that get very messy very quickly. And youth is such a tricky one too, because a lot of us are parents, myself included. And so you can sometimes be clouded by your own judgment about, well, as a parent, I'd want to know, or, I feel that I want to protect this child in this way. But the law says we need to determine whether or not a child can consent to services and a child can consent to the release of their information. This also gets really tricky as well when parents have divorced and there's court orders in place. And in those instances as well, we should always think about the child's best interest. But again, you may wish to get a legal consultation when it comes to some of these issues. The other piece is where we get to request to release information, that if you've been working with a couple and that couple was going through couples therapy, and then also perhaps down the road, that couple has broken up, and now one party of that couple wants access to their information. And if you've got a couple's file, you need to have the consent of both parties to release the information. If you don't, then you're only permitted to release the information that pertains to the individual who's giving you consent. So that can be a tricky one as well. And that may require you to write a summary of the work together. It might require you to redact information about the other partner. And I've even heard as well that with legal advice, some registrants have said, I can't provide for you the record because it's too linked. The work that was done with the couple, I can't separate it out. And so I have heard of requests being denied for that reason as well. But again, it can be kind of tricky, and you need to be aware of the legislation that applies to your practice. You need to be aware as well of workplace policies. And as I've already mentioned as well, the Information and Privacy Commissioner, IPC, they have a website, and they have a lot of really great information about confidentiality and privacy on their website as well, which can be very, very useful. Another really common area where we get is around conflict of interest. And this can take form and shape in many, many different ways. But essentially, a conflict of interest is if you have an interest, like a financial, a personal, or a professional interest, that's going to influence you in carrying out your professional responsibilities. And so if you're being influenced in how you carry out your practice, some of the ways that we hear this happening is if registrants, perhaps if they've been working at a hospital or working at a clinic, and then they go into private practice, and the clinic or the organization has said, you can't take your clients with you, that they belong to this organization or what have you. But then the clients, the registrants are saying, no, I want to take the clients with me. And so that they would perhaps be being more influenced by their own financial gain and professional gain, trying to get their business started up, and perhaps ignore maybe a non-compete agreement or an agreement that they've had with their former organization or employer not to take clients over. Similarly to that, if somebody is working with a client, and again, a private practice example would be that if a client comes to work with someone and the client presents with issues that the registrant isn't competent to work with, and instead of referring that client to someone else or declining services and saying, I'm sorry, I don't have the knowledge or the skills to be able to support you with this, taking that person on and working with them, knowing that they don't have the skills to work with them, but doing it for their own financial or professional gain. So those are some that are quite clear cut. We've also heard of situations as well, which sometimes require a level of nuance. And sometimes we're working with a client and they're really connected with us and they say, oh, you know what, you do such great work. It'd be really great if you could also work with my sibling, my mother, my father. And this isn't in the context of doing family work. This is just you also working with them. And where the context and the nuance comes in is that if you're in a rural or remote area, you may be the only person who's available to work. And so keeping those boundaries in place may be something that you're very familiar with. Similarly, if you're in a small cultural community as well, that perhaps you're the only person around who's able to provide that specific cultural work with somebody. And that's permitted as well, but you have to be very, very mindful about how you're going to put those boundaries in place. Because if you're working with a client and they said, you know, please work with my sibling as well. So you start working with sibling. Well, you might have information about sibling number 2 from sibling number 1 that sibling number 2 never wanted to tell you. You might be provided information from sibling number 2 that requires you to make a duty to report on sibling number 1, who's also your client. That can be really, really challenging as well. Perhaps sibling number 1 tells you information that completely changes your perspective of sibling number 2, and now you can't work with them in an objective way any longer. So when working in these ways, a conflict of interest is very possible. It happens very quickly. Another interesting one that I've heard about as well is an individual was working and their colleague asked them to see the colleague's husband. And so the colleague agreed to see their colleague's husband and then found out from the husband that the husband was having a quite scandalous affair that the colleague, of course, didn't know about. And now all of a sudden, the colleague is left holding this information about their coworker and friend that the coworker and friend doesn't know about. And she called me up to say, what do I do? I'm like, this is why you shouldn't have worked with the husband, because you don't know what they're going to come forward with and tell you about. And so she decided that, of course, she needed to discontinue work with her colleague's husband and refer him elsewhere. So these are things that happen, I think, oftentimes very innocently, and oftentimes very much out of the goodness of people's hearts that they want to help out a friend, colleague, their client. But if we don't stop and reflect on how we may become entangled in a situation and how our either own professional, personal, or financial interests might be influencing our decision making, we can get ourselves into some trouble. And it's really good in those situations to consult with somebody. Because oftentimes when you're in a conflict of interest, you don't know you're in a conflict of interest. It can be a really difficult thing to have that objective perspective about when you're in it. This really closely relates to dual relationships as well. And again, in some communities, be it geographic or cultural, dual relationships are unavoidable, and that's okay. It's just how we manage them that's important. And so when we work with a client, and we realize that we have a professional relationship with them, we might know them from our community as well. One of the examples that I've heard, which I think is cute because it's just so Canadiana, is that, you know, you go to drop your child off at the rink and you realize that their hockey coach is, you know, your client. And so now you have a double relationship or dual relationship with this coach because they're your client and they're also your child's hockey coach. So, okay, how do we manage this? And, you know, this is a situation where when we're working with clients, and sometimes we're aware of the dual relationships out, you know, at the beginning, sometimes they reveal themselves as time goes on. And if it can be managed in the context of the professional relationship, it may be. It's also something that you need to have a really clear conversation about boundaries with that client. And sometimes we refer to this as like the grocery store conversation, that if I bump into you in the grocery store, how are we going to respond? Because if you say, oh, hi, Renu, great to see you. And then Renu's there with her family and they go, oh, Renu, how do you know her? And then it becomes, oh, we may have just had a confidentiality breach that, oh, or so are we going to say that we work with each other? Are we going to say that, you know, we know each other from the community? Maybe I'm not going to say hi to Renu. Maybe I'm just going to wait for Renu to come over and say hi to me if she wants to. But these are conversations that you need to have with clients so that you're prepared for when you see each other in these public spaces, how you're going to respond. And these conversations also need to be documented as well. Private practice is a really big question that we get, and I can see some questions coming through on the chat, which is great. I'm just going to finish off these last 3 points, and then we'll go to the questions in the chat. We get a lot of questions about private practice, of course. And it is an area that is a huge interest for registrants. We always maintain that private practice, psychotherapy, counseling, these are not entry to practice competencies. This is something that you need to go into after years of experience, ongoing training, ongoing supervision. And we just did our educational forum this week as well, where we talked about the competence required to go into private practice and psychotherapy. And that's going to be up on our website very soon as well. So it's a great resource that I would recommend for people. But currently on our website, we do have web pages about private practice and about psychotherapy. There is a webinar on the private practice page that talks about how to prepare for private practice and the necessary requisites that you need to have in place before doing so. So it's something that should be thought of very mindfully, very carefully, in conjunction with other people who know your practice, and always considering how you're going to have supervision and how you're going to build your community around you to support your private practice if you would choose to go that way. Electronic practice, of course, we're talking to each other electronically today. So this is a very contemporary mode of being able to talk to clients. I mean, it used to be that you'd always see each other in an office somewhere. That's not the case anymore. So things that we need to consider when we are practicing electronically, if we are doing a conversation online, is that online platform secure? Do we know that nobody's going to be able to kind of come in and like Zoom bomb you or, you know, talk to your, interrupt your client conversation? Do we also know that the client is speaking to us in an area that's private and confidential? You know, certainly we heard over the pandemic when we were all inside that, you know, there's really big issues about intimate partner violence. And so is that partner present to hear the therapy session? Is there a sign that you need to have that you can signal to each other whether or not it's safe or that it's private when you're talking to somebody? Similarly, we've heard about, you know, youth clients as well, and parents are just waiting off camera to kind of listen to what's being said. So is there a way to signal about privacy and confidentiality? Or if we're communicating, even if it's just, you know, appointment times with our clients online, is there a way that, is there a code or a password that you use that you know that it's actually your client, that somebody hasn't infiltrated their email account? Lastly, about electronic practice too, another really big component is if you're speaking to somebody and they endorse suicidality or harming someone else, and then all of a sudden they turn off their computer. What do you do? How do you manage this situation? And so if we're working electronically with clients, the expectation then is right at the outset of practice for you to discuss this with clients, that if there's a power outage, if I've heard it as well where the social worker had an emergency as well, that they had a medical emergency and the client didn't know what to do. And I've heard the opposite, of course, that a client had a medical emergency and the social worker didn't know what to do. How are we going to manage this? What phone numbers can be called? You know, that type of thing. And so those are things that you'd want to know at the beginning of practice as well, that if there is going to be a medical emergency, you know, for your client, who is their emergency contact that you can call in that situation? And lastly, just cross-jurisdictional practice. We get a lot of this questions because once you're registered in one province in Canada, you can easily be registered in another province in Canada. It's called labor mobility, that if you've passed through one regulatory body, you're able to be easily and expeditiously registered at another regulatory body in Canada. However, if you're working with clients who aren't in Ontario and you're registered in Ontario, you're permitted to work with clients in Ontario. And it doesn't even matter where you are, it matters where the clients are. So you could be anywhere, but the clients, if you're registered with this college, you can work with clients who are physically located in Ontario. If your clients are physically located somewhere else, you need to contact the regulatory body where your clients are located to determine whether or not you're allowed to practice with them in their jurisdiction electronically. So those are sort of the top hits of the commonly asked questions we get in professional practice, the complex practice issues that we look at. And I do know that some questions have come in the chat, so I'm going to pause here. And really, if this question period takes us to the end of the session, that's fine. I just had a few resources left about, or pardon me, a few slides left about resources on the college as well. So happy to take those questions now.
All right. So a few questions here. So Honey John asks, hi, is there a fixed set of hours that is expected to be completed, dedicated by the registrant to complete the CCP? For example, reading resources, mentoring students, etc.
It's a good question, Honey. No, the college does not have a fixed set of hours. Oftentimes when we speak to registrants, more or less it's around 25 hours that people put in, but we don't have anything specific. So you're not required to give us that information.
There were a few more questions that came through, but I couldn't see them in the chat right now.
Oh.
Ashish, will you be able to pull it out and maybe put it in the chat? I think there's some sort of other.
Well, why don't I just maybe finish these questions, finish my last few slides. I'll stop sharing, and then maybe that will help us be able to see the chat a little bit better.
That would be perfect. Thank you so much, Christina.
My pleasure. So again, just really quickly wanted to highlight that we have a lot of different tools on the college website. As I've mentioned, the Code of Ethics and Standards of Practice. Of course, you're receiving a professional practice presentation right now, but we do these at other people's workplaces as well. So if there's an issue that you're struggling with at your workplace, like documentation, like confidentiality, we have come to workplaces to speak to them and do like sort of a group consultation. As I said, there's individual consultations as well. We do have a personal health information protection, or PHIPA, toolkit as well, and other useful articles online. We have a lot of practice guidelines. As I said, we've just, it'll be hot off the presses next week, consent and confidentiality for children and youth. Excuse me. We have one on medication practice, one on parenting plans, and one on performing the controlled active psychotherapy. All really great resources that come the closest to best practices that we have. So that will be really useful for people to have a look at. Our practice notes deal with a variety of different issues where, you know, we help registrants understand how to apply the standards of practice to their practice. We have an ethical decision-making tool, which again, if you're having one of these ethical dilemmas, it can just really help you sort of break down your decision-making and to try to make that a little bit more digestible. Of course, there's the college website. It's chock full of so much information. If you have questions about renewals, if you have questions about registration, the website is full of information. And if you've read through information, you're still unclear, by all means, please contact us and we'll be happy, to guide you. For registrants, we do have our prospective newsletter that comes out twice a year with a lot of different resources in it. And as I said, we have our annual meeting and education day in June, where there's a keynote and then a variety of different consecutive sessions that happen in the afternoon. And our educational forum, as I said, just happened this week in November, but those videos, they're all recorded and all of those videos are available on our website. So I think the next is just, where you can find on the website that we have a resource room, and it's on, if you're on our website, it's on the right-hand side. It's the last tab in the right-hand corner. It says resource room. And if you click on practice resources, this is where you're able to find all sorts of different resources. Each one of these little chevron arrows, it's collapsible, and there's a lot of different information underneath them. So please check that out. And I think I'm going to skip that video because I think it'd be more important to get to questions. So I'm going to stop sharing right now, and maybe that will help us be able to, I thought I was going to stop sharing. And maybe that will help us see the chat a little bit better.
Thank you so much, Christina. That was a very, very informative presentation. I particularly found the portion where you spoke about the commonly practiced questions really helpful. I myself, during my practice, have had, I usually read the practice notes quite often and have had these hypothetical questions in my head. So I have had the opportunity to consult with the college as well, and I found it really, really helpful. So
That's nice to hear that. Thank you.
you so much for that as well. All right, so we'll now move on to the Q&A portion of our workshop. We already have a few questions that were prepared by some of our MASO members even before the actual time that we have had here. So I'll go into the chat once more and read them out. So I'll the next question is Alina Hansen has asked, are there any extra steps to take if you have not been practicing social work for the past 3 years? I have been working as a social worker in India till 2021, then as an ABA therapist from 2022 onwards. How does this registration process look like for me?
Yeah, Alina, it's a great question because you're right on the verge that we do have something in our registration process called currency. And that means that you have to have been practicing in the scope of practice for the last 5 years before registering. So you're within that 5 years. So that's a good thing. And also, if you've been working as an ABA, which I'm assuming you mean the autism behavioral analyst, I believe. And that would also be in the scope of practice as well. So what I would do, if you want to register, that you should have currency. You're always able as well. I'm going to say the info account, the info at OCSWSSW.org. We absolutely answer our info line. I know some people don't like to email info lines because they think, no, it's going to go into the void. But by all means, it looks like you have been practicing within the past 5 years, so you would meet currency. So it should be a pretty straightforward registration process.
Okay. Yeah, so I see a thumbs up from Alina. That's good. So from Tom B, internationally trained MSW graduates often cannot secure supervised practice due to lack of sponsorship, insurance, or union barriers. Could the college create a supported pathway using FCRP funding to ensure supervised practice and better workforce integration? The question goes on. With recent changes in Canada US relations, will the ASWB exam rollout be affected? Also, since many US states allow supervised practice as an alternative route to full licensure, will the college consider adopting a similar pathway in Ontario?
So thank you very much for those questions. They're very important questions. Unfortunately, it's not the college who'd be able to secure a pathway to supervised practice and better workforce integration. That would be something that I might suggest you contact, or perhaps, this association also work in conjunction with the Ontario Association of Social Workers, because that would be something that would certainly fall into the mandate of the associations to advocate for those workplace practices. So I would recommend either reaching out to the OASW directly, or perhaps that's even something that this association would like to try to partner with the OASW to address those issues, because unfortunately that's just outside of the college's mandate. With the recent changes in Canada-US relations, well, this is a moving target, Tom, there's no doubt. As things stand currently, it has not impacted the ASWB exam rollout. I don't think any of us right now can say anything for sure about what's going to be happening with, US-Canadian relationships in the future. Currently, no, it has not impacted the rollout. And unfortunately, I can't comment on the US states using supervised practice because that's just not a mechanism that we have in Canada. How we are permitted to register people in Ontario is laid out in our legislation and in our registration regulation. which is a regulation of our act. And so in order for that to be changed, there'd need to be an act in Parliament to open up, into provincial Parliament, to open up our act and change how registration happens. So at this time, no, there isn't that pathway in Ontario right now.
All right. We do have a few more questions from Tom.
Mhm.
In the US, regulators often issue limited licenses allowing supervised practice while candidates attempt the exam over 5 to 7 years. Would the college consider a similar pathway in Ontario, especially since failed exam attempts can cost states over 300,000 yearly? Also, can you explain how clients can maintain continuity of care when their provider moves? Also, what is the policy of using AI in practice, including its role in record keeping and in supporting informed service delivery?
Tom, you came prepared today, and I appreciate it. Thank you. My question to your first question here about US regulators, again, how our legislation is rolled out. We don't have that pathway of supervised practice while people are attempting their exam currently. Again, we haven't rolled out the exam in Ontario yet, so these policies are still being developed about how the exam is going to be implemented. How it stands currently is that you would need to pass the exam in order to register with the college. That could be something that, if it is being found to be a huge barrier to practice, could be investigated in the future. But currently, we do not have that pathway in our legislation, and it would be something that we would need to appeal to have the legislation opened up to have a similar registration pathway for individuals who haven't completed the exam. Continuity of care when your provider moves. Well, it's an interesting point. So if your provider was to move out of province, so I'm a client, Renew is my service provider, Renew decides to move to Manitoba. And all of a sudden, what about my continuity of care? Well, Renew is permitted to continue to practice in Ontario. We do have what's called an electronic practice registration in Ontario. So Renew wouldn't have to be a full member in Ontario any longer. She could be a member in Manitoba, but she could pay $100 a year to practice exclusively electronically in Ontario. If what you're talking about is the client moving and you want that continuity of care, as I said, you'd have to contact the regulatory body where the client is located to determine if they permit you to practice electronically. Because as the Ontario College, I can't give you permission to practice anywhere else except Ontario. So you have to contact the jurisdiction where the client is located to find out what they require there. It's also an interesting thing when we talk about continuity of care as well, that as a principal, of course, we can see that continuity of care is a valuable thing. If it's something that's becoming a barrier there, sometimes we do have to ask ourselves questions whether or not the client could benefit from the perspective of another person. And sometimes, unfortunately, in these cases where people are moving, we do just have to refer clients to other people. AI in practice. Yes, the college does have an article actually about using AI in practice. And as I'm talking, I'm going to pop into the chat for you as well. And so it is certainly something that we're aware of and that we do know that people are doing. And certainly using like a note-taking app to assist, obviously, with note-taking is something that's become quite common. I've just put the article in the chat for you right now. Really what we have to think about when we're using AI in practice, are we ensuring that no client identifying information is going into the AI? Because as we know, it goes into the cloud and that confidential information has been breached. If we are using the AI note taker, where is that information going? Is it being stored in Canada? Is it being stored in the States? How does that work? What does that look like? Because certainly the different privacy legislation between the two countries and different areas around the world are different. Are the clients aware that you're using it? Have they consented for it to be used? Because there are certain clients who would not want to have their information used, and put into an AI system. There are some clients who we've heard of as well, reject the environmental impact of AI and don't want to participate in using it. So have you obtained informed consent to use AI as well? Are you ensuring that, if it's just note taking, are you ensuring that the note taking is accurate? I've used AI for note taking as well, and I actually didn't like it that much. I think that I'm a better note taker than the AI is. So that's something that you need to consider as well. Is it accurate? Does it reflect the conversations that you had? Did it create a link that was hallucinated? We know that that happens sometimes as well. And we've heard issues as well where people have been using it to develop care plans or treatment plans, and they're AI is spitting out things that perhaps aren't relevant to the needs of the client, or with resources and links that aren't accurate. And so what we always have to center our work in is this in the best interest of the client? Am I protecting the client's confidentiality? And am I ensuring that this isn't just being done, again, for my own personal benefit or personal gain? Is this being done for the best interest of the client?
Thank you so much, Christina. Before going into Anita's question, I did see Varun G raise his hand. So, Varun, do you want to unmute your mic and ask your question?
Yeah, I mean, I'm so sorry. This might be like a stupid question, but I'm recently, so basically, I graduated my social work back from India in 2017. And I practiced like the same profession for like maybe one more year, but then I moved to Canada and I have never been practicing social work. I've been trying to get into social work aspect, but I've never been able to. So right now, I just went back to India and came back as a permanent resident recently. So now I'm in the process of registering for social work and with OCCSW and stuff. So I just earlier I saw a question. You were answering a question about having 5 years of experience prior to application. So how does that affect me in that case?
And that's great too, Bryn, because Anita has asked a similar question as well. So with the currency piece, if you haven't been practicing in the past 5 years, you can be registered with what we call TCLs, terms, conditions, and limitations. And what that means is that within a year of registering with the practice, you will have had to have found a supervisor who can supervise your social work practice and provide. So the supervisor needs to be approved by the college, and then that they will need to provide several reports to the college about how they've been supervising your practice. Because essentially the supervisor at the end of your supervision, which is typically 6 months long, they will need to affirm whether or not, in their professional opinion, you have the competence to practice independently as a social worker. So we certainly do have a pathway for individuals who don't have that 5-year currency. And I would recommend, as I mentioned earlier, that if you have further questions about that, you can either email our registration department using registration@ocswssw.org or info@ocswssw.org. We do have a pathway for that. And as I said, it would require finding a supervisor who gets approved by the college. And then the supervisor would need to prepare if their supervision term is the standard 6 months, because you don't have any other extenuating circumstances, the supervisor would have to provide 3 different supervision reports to the college, letting us know of your progress, your working goals, and then at the end, attesting that you have the requisite competence to practice independently.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much, Chrissy.
My
Thank you.
pleasure.
Okay, I see a thumbs up from Anita, so I'm guessing the question was answered there as well. Just letting everybody know that we are we are nearing the ending of our presentation. It's already 11:27. We do have a few more questions. So, yes, Shreya Nair asks, I filed an application around August and I have not received status of assessments yet. I tried emailing them and I received that I would receive an update soon within 5 to 10 days, but I have not received anything yet. Is there anything that I might be doing wrong?
Oh, Shreya, no, you're not doing anything wrong. I'm sorry that you're having that struggle. No, I would just email again. I'm sorry to hear that. I have to admit, like right now, we are in the midst of our very busy season because it's renewal season right now. But I appreciate the frustration. I'm sorry to hear that that's happened. Please just keep at it. Um, please keep at it.
Okay. I do have a few more questions here written down from our members previous to the presentation.
Oh, great.
So, does informal learning such as podcasts, webinars, case discussions qualify towards CCP requirements? And how should registrants document these activities? If yes, what is the recommended method for registrants to maintain evidence of completion for CCP activities?
Great question. And yes, I mean, all of those things do count. And the big qualifier for all of this is, do these podcasts, do these journals, do these articles, do they relate to your learning goals? So if it's something that you say that I want to learn more about setting boundaries, and these podcasts talk about setting professional boundaries, and again, we'd want them to be evidence-based, that there's an expert in the field who's talking about this. Absolutely, they can use. And where you would document that is on your CCP document. So they're on the college website. In that little video we saw earlier, there was examples of them. But if you go on the college website, underneath the tab that says registrants, there is a drop down for the CCP. You'll find the documents there. You'd be able to document on there that you listen to this podcast on this date, and that would be your evidence.
Okay. For applicants, next question. For applicants coming from non-social work professional backgrounds, is it mandatory that the supervisor have to be registered social worker when verifying required social supervised hours and previous work experience?
So if we're talking about somebody who's going through the equivalency process, so somebody who doesn't have a social work degree, then my understanding is yes, it does have to be a social worker. Registration isn't my area of expertise. I'm quite certain that for currency, it doesn't have to be a social worker, but for equivalency, it does. But by all means, please do check me on that. But if you go on our website underneath applicants, that there is a tab underneath applicants for individuals who don't have a degree in social work, and it will give you that information under that tab as well.
There's a question from Shreya Nair. Just reminding everyone, we won't be taking any more questions due to time constraints. Shreya Nair asks, is there any difference in BSW graduates while filling application compared to MSW?
Not in the eyes of the college, no. So to register with the college, you either need to have a diploma in social service work, and that would get you through the social service work stream, or for a social worker, it's either BSW or MSW. So in the eyes of the college, no, it does not make a difference. If you have your BSW, I registered with the college when I had my BSW. And then when I went back to school and got my MSW, I just sent a copy of my transcript to the college to say, hey, can you please update my education that I also have an MSW? And there's no additional cost for that. There's no additional need to re-register again. So absolutely not. If you want to register as a BSW, I did. You can too.
One more question, Christina.
Yeah.
Are there minimum or maximum number of activities required to fulfill a CCP goal?
No is the short answer. Yeah, so by all means, and we know that in addition to, is there any minimum or maximum, not all goals are going to be completed in 1 year either. That you might be working at a goal, and maybe it's one goal, maybe it's one really big goal. You're working on getting, I don't know, your EMDR training or something to this effect, or your certification. And maybe that's going to take you longer than a year. But you've been working on that, you've been having supervision, you've been working in the consultation, you've been reading the articles. No, you can have one big goal, you can have a goal that stretches over multiple years as well.
We've come to the end of our Q&A session. Thank you so much, Christina, for all those amazing answers. Very informative, very encouraging. And we have now we're going towards the end of our session, where to conclude we will have the word of thanks delivered by our MASO executive team member, Mr. Ashish Gunachan. Mr. Ashish has been coordinating the media and public relations with dedication and vision, as you have seen in this webinar, supporting the growth and efforts of MASO with a background of working with mental health and rehabilitation services in India and various nonprofit organizations in Toronto. Ashish is currently employed with Ontario Health at Home as a care coordinator. I would like to invite Mr. Ashish Kunachan to deliver the word of thanks.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Renu, for the kind introduction. Thank you, everyone, for attending today's important session. We sincerely hope this information the information shared was helpful for your professional journey. And now I would like to take a moment to express our deepest gratitude to our guest speaker. Thank you, Christina, for for this incredibly insightful and clear presentation today. Your explanation on the college mandate, registration process, CCP learning activities, and guidance on complex practice issues were excellent. And the answers provided in the question and Q&A were highly informative as well. We especially thank those who submitted questions in advance and those who asked them live, making this a truly interactive event. We deeply appreciate the college's commitment to supporting practitioners and bringing us all together. MASO truly values this relationship and looks forward to strengthening our collaboration in the days ahead. On behalf of MASO, thank you again, Christina.
It's my absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having us. I also agree that we look forward to strengthening our collaboration. And I just realized too that if anyone wanted to use this session on their CCP, go right ahead. That's absolutely permitted as well. And if you have any further questions, please reach out to the college. Like I said, there's the info account, there's the practice account, there's the registration account. By all means, if you have any further questions, we'd love to hear from you. So thank you so much as well. We really appreciated this opportunity.
We also want to thank our excellent MC, Renu Paul, for her seamless management of the session flow. And a huge thank you to all dedicated MASO volunteers who assisted with the coordination today. And finally, to all our participants, thank you for taking the time to join for our session and for your eager attendance. Thank you all for joining and have a great rest of the Saturday.
Thank you all so much. It's so appreciated.
Thank you once again, everyone who joined us today. We truly appreciate your presence. I can see a lot of reaction, thumbs ups, hearts coming in. So that's great. Wishing each of you a wonderful rest of the day, a joyful holiday season as we head towards the end of 2025, and a very, very happy and amazingly prosperous new year ahead. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.